Hello, and thanks for tuning in. My name is Asia Lara, and I'm a program manager here at Humanities Washington. We're a nonprofit organization whose mission is to open minds and bridge divides by creating spaces to explore different perspectives. Today's discussion on climate justice for Pacific Islanders will be led by Dr. Tabitha Espina. Born and raised in Guam and having received her PhD from Washington State University, Tabitha is now a postdoctoral associate at Northeastern University and affiliate faculty in their Asian Studies program. Her research interests include trans-Pacific rhetoric, island feminisms, decolonization, and the public humanities. And without further ado, I'll pass it along to you, Tabby.
Well, Suzus Ma'asi Asia for once again that very generous introduction and mostly for providing me the opportunity to share in conversation, to share in the wisdom that the community has on the issues concerning climate justice, specifically as they disproportionately impact Pacific Islanders. And so I am joined by distinguished leaders in the community. And I want to take the opportunity for them to share with us their perspectives, their ideas, and just be nourished by the wisdom that they hold and the experiences that they have with regards to climate justice. And so I'd like to provide each of them the opportunity to introduce themselves and to share about the organizations they represent, as well as how they see themselves working within this conversation on climate justice. And so Michael and Joseph, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, introducing any organization that you would like to represent, any communities that you would like to represent, where you call home, and your pronouns. And so Michael, we'll begin with you.
Good morning. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Spencer, and I'm a professor at the University of Washington School of Social Work. I also am a member of the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute. And in that institute, I hold the position of Director of Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and Oceania Affairs. And then I will turn the floor over and let Joseph introduce himself, because Joseph is somebody who, I've only been in Seattle for about 3 years. And one of the things that I've done since I've been here is outreach to the community. And Joseph has been definitely somebody who has been a beacon for our communities, and someone that I'm very proud to say that I work with.
Michael, yeah, thank you for that warm intro. Also, Michael Spencer has been part of our, Dr. Michael Spencer has been part of our COVID response work here in Washington State, as far as organizing our community in the last year and a half, not just in having the material sort of things that they need to continue to survive and thrive, but also thinking about, you know, how do we think about collect the data, you know, how do we tell a story about our people, especially because COVID had hit Pacific peoples in a very different way. We were experiencing a very different COVID pandemic than other folks. And I say that to say that, you know, our folks have, you know, been suffering extreme like disparities around health, 11 times hospitalization throughout COVID, 5 times the death rates. And so we know that COVID has been a huge burden on Pacific people. So yeah, Michael has been instrumental in supporting us with doing some research, some, you know, qualitative research to see what our communities, how our communities are doing, and also not just in surviving, but what are the meaningful pathways forward for our folks after COVID, right? What does it mean for us to thrive as Pacific people? So, but yeah, my name is Joseph. I use all pronouns. I serve as the executive director of the Pacific Islander Community Association of Washington. And I am one of 30 staff that is a part of this organization. And we do a lot of things, but our mission is really to establish cultural home to center community power and to advance the wellness of Pasifika peoples here in the Northwest.
Oh, Suzus Maasi to you both. I cannot overstate what an honor it is to have both of you here and to be able to share space with you. I also wanted to say that I appreciate just the spirit of sharing, the spirit of collaboration, and the spirit of respect and reciprocity that you both have exemplified just in your descriptions of the work that you're doing, and also the collaborations that you have and the teams that you represent. I think that especially in addressing a lot of the concerns that you brought up, Joseph, that the importance of community in addressing these concerns is so important. The importance of representing our communities, the importance of sharing in community particular obstacles that we face, and connecting with other communities to not just, as you mentioned, survive, but essentially thrive in circumstances in which it seems almost impossible to. So I just wanted to say that I deeply admire the conversation already, and just the spirit of sharing that I think is a value that many cultures in the Pacific share, and one that I wanted to have this space to talk about. I also want to be very clear about the impetus of this talk, and why I think it's so significant that Humanities Washington has provided us an opportunity to have this conversation. As we know, in recent times, there has been a lot of conversation about the Asian American Pacific Islander community, or the Asian Pacific American community, or the multitude of monikers used to describe a very diverse group. And what I wanted to focus specifically on in our conversation is to really highlight the obstacles specifically faced by Pacific Islanders. Because as Joseph mentioned, they're very particular, they are very specific, and I think that more conversation needs to be had about these nuances that are often lost when we talk about the AAPI community, or the Asian American Pacific Islander community more broadly. And so I have a couple of questions, just really situating this argument in the Pacific Islander experiences, Pasifika values, how all of those kind of coalesce in this particular historical moment of the pandemic, of communities facing intense struggle set against the backdrop of a significant event that is affecting the entire world. And so I would like to begin first by providing our viewers and our listeners just an overview of what climate justice is, how it's defined, and how you feel that Pacific Islanders are disproportionately impacted by climate issues. And again, I would be remiss not to acknowledge those who have come before me, who have inspired my own thinking of this conversation. I think of Julian Uggins' recent book, Perpetual Light, and talking about the experiences of the Chamorro people and how they are impacted by climate justice. I think of Craig Santos Perez, another Chamorro poet, and both of them good friends of mine who speak very extensively on the issue of climate justice. And so really thinking about how those works of literature are reflective of a very real experience that can then be explored further in things like community advocacy, in social work and qualitative analysis, in the work that you all do. So really trying to bring together the literature on the community with the experiences of the community. So yes, if you all wouldn't mind just sharing your definition or your thoughts on climate justice and how you feel that Pacific Islanders are impacted by climate issues. And either of you can chime in.
I can start if you like, Joseph. Okay, I'll start by, just by saying that I think, I'm not an expert in climate justice in and of itself, right? But climate justice is an extremely important issue because of the impact that it has on our communities. But I think when we sort of problematize climate change as the problem, I think sometimes what we do is we ignore the roots of where climate change comes from. Climate in and of itself is not the problem. The problem really lies in, at least for Pacific Islanders, I believe that it lies within the concepts of imperialism, capitalism, settler colonialism, and white supremacy. These are all the roots of the problems that have led to the sea level rises, the droughts, the weather anomalies, the acidification of the oceans, the heat stress, the disappearance of islands in our Pasifika, especially those in the South. Just within the last 10 years, we have seen the disappearance of islands in the Solomons, in Micronesia, and thousands of islands that have become uninhabitable. And I think that, to put the blame on climate would be disingenuous to the actual cause and the drivers of environmental degradation. So as we talk about imperialism, for example, and capitalism and the intersection between those two things, we look at the views of humans and environments as separate, and the latter being a commodity. We understand concepts like manifest destiny, which relates to humans' ability to control the environment. When we think about settler colonialism, we think of frameworks of land ownership and viewing indigenous lands or Pasifika lands as nobody's land. And so that they are able to extract, usurp our property, and engage in capitalistic ventures that lead to the exploitation of our land and our people, displacement of our communities, diversion of our resources, the diversion of our water, which is very, very critical. Oftentimes, historically, to divert waters from our communities for plantation crops, and today for other capitalist ventures like tourism, that change the environment. And most importantly, and I think that this is the root here, it affects our connection to the land. It replaces our culture with settler culture. It is enforced by militarization. The Pacific is one of the most heavily militarized places in the world. The mineral extraction has not only damaged land, but has led for us to a loss in terms of food sovereignty. A lot of our foods, when we think about our foods, we think not only about our lands, but if you think about our foods as being from coastal places as well, and so things like rising tides, things like changes in ocean temperatures will not, and the diversion of water, for example, I mean, those things. So, just to give you one concrete example, diverting water, fresh water from streams, then restricts the amount of water that enters into the ocean. Where the fresh water and the ocean water meet is brackish water. And that brackish water is where life occurs. That's where our seaweed grows. That's where small fish get their food from seaweed. And big fish get their food from little fish. So when you destroy the coastal lands through water diversion, that's just one example. You destroy the seaweed, and you destroy the seaweed, you destroy the habitat of fish, which leads to our inability to fish and to maintain our own food sovereignty and healthy diets. And so, I think I've gone on long enough, but I was on a roll there. These things I get a little passionate about, and so I mean, for me, as much as climate is a real problem, right? It's a global problem. We're all experiencing that, and it's only going to get worse. I think if we continue to put the blame or put the attention on climate in and of itself, as opposed to human beings and the relationship that we have with our land, then I think that we're going to miss the point. I don't think people are going to get it, and I don't know if we're going to make a whole lot of progress. So I'll end with that, and I'll let Joseph follow up.
Yeah, Michael just answered the question. Why am I here? But I think to offer some other, a different perspective, we know that, Michael talked about capitalism, white supremacy, consumerist, militarism, all of the ways that imperialism has driven this dispossession of people, especially Indigenous people, from having embodied connection to land, embodied connection to culture, to food sources. I mean, so climate justice for Pacific peoples is really a fight for survival, a fight for our race and our people not to be genocided, right? Because we know that when you kill the mother, you also kill the people that depend on the mother, right? And the mother for us is the ocean. Like Michael said, we've already seen the devastation of the killing of our lagoons, of our coral reefs. Those were intimate practices that were developed over thousands of years. Of human peoples interacting with their oceans, and we think about the type of fishing and lifestyles that our people had. They were very sustainable lifestyles, right? Those food sources were abundant, and they kept giving, right? And so they were sacred places. But in most islands now, our islands, the Samoan and Tongan Islands, where I'm from, like a lot of the lagoons and the corals have been destroyed because of climate change, right? And not to mention, a lot of our folks are settled on the coast, right? And so, when you have climate justice or climate change, you're really thinking about, like, I originally was displaced by climate change. Our house was destroyed in a cyclone in American Samoa. And so our family uprooted to live in Upolu Island. And another cyclone came and destroyed our house there. And so economically, it didn't seem feasible for my family to rebuild a home within a 5-year span because of the cadence now of these storms. These storms are coming every year. There's floodings every year. Our families are having to constantly throw money away, right? Money away because they're rebuilding. The floodings are worse. The storms are worse. They're more, there's a stronger cadence to them. So really, climate justice for Pacific people is a fight for survival, right? I also think about the connections of the fight with Indigenous people in the Pacific and also the Indigenous people here on the continent, right? The folks here are also doing a tremendous job to resist the ways that we have looked at land, looked at forests, looked at water as a commodity, right? When really they, in our traditional beliefs and our spiritual beliefs, they are persons. They are living persons, which is, I think some of the more tremendous wins that Indigenous people have had across this world is when we fought to, we have white people fighting to, or in the past fighting to make corporations persons, human persons, right? But you have Indigenous people fighting to have mountains and water, bodies of water to be persons, right? So you think about the values that we place, and I think that's the difference. I also want to say that, it's not just white supremacy for Pacific people, it's also Asian imperial supremacy. and Asian conquest over Pacific peoples. And this is why this API thing is very difficult for Pacific people, because we have been genocided by Asian empires, genocided, colonized, right? And so you also have to acknowledge the role of Asian empire over the Pacific, especially in Papua, where you see the Indonesian governments devastate, the rainforest. We have the second biggest rainforest in the world after Brazil. It's Papua New Guinea. And that rainforest right there is being, raped and pillaged for capital. And that's not white people; those are brown people from the continents. So there's a dynamic there, I think, that is also occurring where water-based communities are being exploited by land-based communities, and we have to acknowledge that as well.
Thank you both for those very impassioned descriptions of this issue of climate justice. And I really like how both of you talked about the structures. And while climate and issues of climate change have a significant impact, what we are really interested in is talking about the relational impact, how there are particular structures in place that exacerbate the issues of climate change in ways that are erased when we don't think about the personal impacts of how is it that different people within asymmetrical systems of power are responding to climate change and the depletion of resources, and how there continues to be conflict, exploitation because of the continually diminishing resources that are the result of climate change. So thank you both for sharing that truth that I think is so important. And I completely agree with you, Joseph, that when we don't talk about this issue, when we don't talk about the fact that white supremacy isn't the only concern, but actually it's a violence enacted upon Pacific bodies by other brown bodies, by landed bodies, over ocean bodies. When we don't mention those things, it almost seems as though they are excused. And so I want to also be very open about my perspective or my position within this conversation. I identify as a third generation colonial settler. And it was because of this very complicated position that I really wanted to have Pacific Islander voices be represented in this conversation, because I feel as though, and again, I don't want to speak for an entire community, but for myself, I wasn't able to really articulate or understand my own complicity in these asymmetrical power systems, my own complicity in exploitation, until I identified as a colonial settler, until I recognized the generational impacts of my family's settling and my family's immigration, until I recognized the importance of Indigenous sovereignty. And so this conversation for me is a gesture towards that, or maybe not even more so a gesture, but an acknowledgement, and to use a value that a moral value that I grew up in and that I had the honor of being introduced to, is of inafamalek, of reciprocity, of respect. And so I appreciate you both sharing the experiences of your communities with the hope that it fosters a conversation that is respectful, that is that truly recognizes these issues and it recognizes our complicity in these issues, whether it's in white supremacy, whether it's in Asian settler colonialism, but just being aware of that position and what we do in and with it is important. And both of you kind of help to transition into my next question about how this issue relates to Pasifika values of place. You both talked about Indigenous peoples, Pacific peoples' relationship to place, and how seeing the land and the air and the sea and the ocean not as commodities but as people of beings with which to have a relationship, that those values pervade the approach to climate change, to climate justice. So can you speak to that a little bit more?
Sure. I'll go ahead and take a shot. So one more thing I wanted to just kind of say about sort of this notion of climate justice and sort of reframing it again, because I think for Pacifica people, it we are not always necessarily have the same goals, right, as a lot of folks who are interested in climate justice. I'll give you one example. So we know that wind power, has become more popular as a sustainable source of energy than fossil fuels, and of course that's true, and people want to invest in wind technology as far as taking steps towards climate justice. But if you've ever seen these windmills, they're massive, right? They're humongous, and you all know the term NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard. So guess where these windmills in Hawaii specifically are located, right? They're located in our rural Hawaiian communities, where our Hawaiian animals and our Hawaiian birds are located. One of the endangered animals, is actually for us the embodiment of one of our four major gods. So so there's not just a connection with animals as relational, but also as our aumakua, our guardians, our deities, are part of our spiritual life. And so, here's a perfect example of how climate justice and Pasifika lives, land and lives, are in conflict with one another. So, I think that's kind of an important issue I wanted to bring up. But going back to sort of now your question around, the relational aspect. I'll give you a little story from our own Hawaiian culture, and that is our creation story, our kumulipo, which talks about the first human being being stillborn and was therefore buried, and out from that stillborn child grew taro or kalo, which is our the food that sustains our life and the lives of many Pasifika people. And so for us, kalo is the and then the second human being was told that he needed to take care of kalo, that was his relative, that was his brother, and that there was a relational aspect to it. So for us, kalo is our relative, so when we talk about our relationship to kalo, well, kalo is our ancestor, and so it really goes beyond sort of this relational sense of, oh, I'm one with nature, which is kind of this growing Western concept of conservationism, to view nature as pristine, but for us, it's a deeper spiritual meaning as well, and it connects us to all life. So, for example, the word ohana, right, comes from the word oha, which is the shoot from the taro, the offshoot of the taro. So when we say ohana, we talk about all of the outshoots, all of the oha, and so the relationship to our land, like I said, is spiritual. It is sustaining. It provides us with a means for sort of preserving our identity, our culture, our homelands. It's one of, I think Joseph talked very well about that. And yeah, and I'll let him kind of chime in now. Hopefully I set you up good for something.
Oh yeah, you're always setting us good for something. Yeah, I mean, place and yeah, I think there's a word in our language. It's it's similar to the word of purpose for the Hawaiian word. Michael, what is the Hawaiian word again for purpose? Like your life purpose.
Oh, you're gonna stump me there, Joseph.
You're kuleana, right?
Oh,
Kuleana.
yeah, akuleana, yeah.
That's one word, right? But
yeah.
in the Samoan tradition, it's the whasinomanga. Somebody's whasinomanga, and the meaning of purpose for a human person, for a Samoan human person, is actually attached to the stewardship of their land and water. And that's the culmination of what whasinomanga is, right? So you're not in right purpose if you're not stewarding the land and water well, right? And that is so rooted in all of our Indigenous traditions, right? And Michael talked about, being related to the tarot, in all of our genealogy, when we break it down, like, there's relations, like we are descendants of trees, we're descendants of animals, we are kindred to animals and trees. Not just that, but there's a very intimate kindred to also the cosmos, right? And so you have a hyper intimate culture that teaches you about, like, everything is relational, everything has mana, everything has tapu, right? And if you live your life in such a way, there's a word in the Samoan tradition called va, or va, which is the sacred space in between all things, right? So when you grow up in a culture that understands the va, the sacred space between all things, you learn how to value things, right? You learn how to not commodify things, but to honor it, and to honor it as, as its own sort of life, right? Yeah, I think that's the intimacy that Pacific peoples have. Also another a way that you can know it in the Samoan culture is like our hearts is in Samoan language, fatu, it's rock. Our blood is ili or palapala, it's dirt, right? So like our ears are leaves, our tongue is a leaf, right? Like and our head is a cloud, right? So it's just this hyper sort of relational to the outside world, right? And I think if you are that committed to place, and there's a history to it, you automatically honor it. And I think that is what's missing in a diaspora. When we are displaced from land and we come here to the US, a lot of our folks, in some ways, there's no antenna, there's no more, whasinomanga, right? And we really have to lean into then solidarity with Native peoples on this continent to really find our whasinomanga here, right? Because we have to understand the earth that we're on, the trees that are around us, and also how they're related to us, right? And I think that's the work that we have to do as Pacific peoples, especially in a diaspora, so that we don't ourselves perpetuate colonial settler mentality. Pacific peoples do promote that. If we don't do the work of understanding our history, knowing who we are and our place in the world, we can easily mimic modern man and what modern man's goal is. So that's a lot of the work that we do here at Pika, is really trying to do something the Pasifika way. So it's different, right? It's different from the other way.
Well, thank you both for just beautifully describing how conceptions of identity, of family, of belonging, of honor are conceived within relationships, are conceived within language, in stories shared and passed on, and in the metaphors we use to describe our experiences. I thought that was so beautifully described, especially in talking about values and how values provide the Pasifika values provide a lens by which to approach these very important issues. And I just wanted to just highlight the beauty of the language, the beauty of the stories, and the beauty of those metaphors in communicating those values. So thank you so much. Joseph, you brought up a really important point about understanding and recognizing the possibilities of place, so as not to reify settler colonial logics, and to truly acknowledge the values that you bring, but also who you are within a particular place and space. And so my third question is situated within Washington State. And I'm just really interested in how you or your organization, in very concrete ways, I guess, enacts some of the values that you described so beautifully. What is it that your organization or you yourself have done to address these issues, maintaining these values, and also communicating the urgency of these issues across the state for all Washingtonians?
It's a good question, Tabitha. So I am on Muckleshoot territory, Coast Salish territory. There are 29 tribes here in Washington State. We are doing our best to make sure that we are, building authentic relationships with Indigenous people here that isn't on tokenism and having them come perform indigeneity when we want them to be a part of our events. But what does it mean to meaningfully partner on advancing, the causes of our forests, the causes of the waters here? I don't know if you've ever had time, Tabby, to look at like salmon pathways and salmon runs, but there's something very holy about it. Like every time I'm there, and I see the salmon come back, I know that my Indigenous friends who are Coast Salish, they see the salmon as people, and they see the salmon as basically the Christ figure, in their communities. And that's how they've honored, they fought for the forest so that the salmon are able to survive, not just the salmon, but all the other living creatures here. And I have to have the same zeal to of love, for the persons that is a salmon, because that's how much love they have, right? And how do we get our peoples to see with Coast Salish eyes, their home? And so I think we have done some work to do that, to make sure that we are an embodied people, that we are constantly working to advance the solidarity of Indigenous people here, that we are not hijacking space from Native people here, but that we come alongside. We're also learning how to really do food in a real way, to look at sources of food here in Washington State and learn from Indigenous communities, and also just learn the 4 seasons, helping our people to learn the 4 seasons, what can grow in the winter, what can grow in the summer, so that there's a more meaningful love and respect of these parts, right? Because in the island, it's like, we know how to do the taro, we know how to grow the breadfruit, the coconut trees, they grow on their own, banana trees, they kind of just grow on their own, there's not a lot of, there's, a little bit of manipulation, but it's not hard work like it is here. Yeah, and so it's we also have a garden or a farm that we work in partnership with a Black farmer to give space for our people to be on the land. And so I think we can do a lot more. We can do a lot more with our Indigenous communities. It's going to take time to build that, I think at least for South Pacific Islanders, a lot of our forests, our old growth, were decimated like 100 years ago. And I know that that is the same sort of machinery that was done here in the Pacific Northwest. And I think there is a lot of work for us to really learn about how, like, for example, the Quinault Nation are like champions of like Indigenous forest laws protection, right? They are like leading the country, in the Indian country, in fighting the federal government over, establishing a new understanding of how to protect the forest. and they develop laws that are very unique and also come from their values. So how do we learn from them, their zeal in protecting their forest, so that we can also be as strong in our activism?
Yeah, that was a
Thank
wonderful
you.
response.
Yes.
I'll only sort of actually build off of that response. Joseph talked a little bit earlier about the impact of climate change on displacement, and I think that that's super important in terms of our diaspora, So, certainly there is danger of us also being, the colonizer, the settler colonizer as well. But, our positionality, I think, is a little bit different. And also to our positionality as Indigenous people. And I think that that's something that is being recognized more and more today. Before I came to Seattle, I was at the University of Michigan, and in the Midwest, as a native Hawaiian, I was part of the Asian American Pacific Islander faculty there. When they needed to count a native, yeah, of course, they put me in that box. But, intellectually, I was in this other camp, and not necessarily in American Indian studies, right? And so, here, one of the reasons I came to Washington was because of the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute, and because it was run by two Native Wahine women who, were championing these ideas, and welcomed me because of their need to outreach beyond Indigenous people of this continent. And so, I'm grateful for the inclusion in those spaces as well. And I think therefore it's important for us to understand that, all identities are place-based too, and so for us, creating our Pasifika, or recreating or reimagining or revitalizing, I mean, all of these things, right? Our Pasifika identity within the context of a diaspora, within the context of displacement, but also in solidarity with other Indigenous people. And so, yeah, I mean, whatever we can do to learn from them, whatever we can offer, to them as well. I think having these exchanges really makes us understand how our histories are tied, and how our futures are tied too.
Oh, that was so powerful, both of you, just in stressing the importance of solidarity and how that solidarity directly confronts the exploitation, the competition, the exploitation and the competition, which are values of settler logics and the logic of colonization. So by stressing solidarity, we do our part, right? To the extent that we are able. But I really appreciate you just sharing very concrete ways that we can think about what solidarity looks like in the different lands, and how it involves working together and alongside with. Joseph, you used a really, really good positioning, right, of alongside with, which once again directly confronts the power structures of wanting to be better than or ahead of, or the Western individualism of wanting to be better, wanting to forge ahead, wanting to be better than or more than, but instead a solidarity that enacts itself in being alongside, and coming. As I have been listening to you both, I also appreciate just the posture of humility that is exemplified in the ways that you approach this issue. And I think that oftentimes humility is not always necessarily perceived as strength, but the way in which you both approach these issues in humility, saying we want to learn more from the Indigenous people of Washington, of the continent. We want to understand our position within these issues. I think that humility exemplifies a strength that speaks to the strength of Pasifika values, of Pacific people across the state and across the nation. So I just want to thank you both for just being shining examples for all of us of what solidarity looks like and the strength that it entails. And that all of that kind of, I guess, informs my final question. And when we talk about solidarity, when we talk about the complexity of these issues, and I again just want to point to the fact that this conversation emerges from what I perceived as a concern of erasure. When we talk about these issues and we use the broad strokes of AAPI, Michael, you had experiences of that title or that moniker not necessarily fitting your experience nor fitting your particular interests. And so I guess I want to ask both of you, what can be done to combat erasure in these issues? How can we continue to have a conversation that centers the Pacific Islander experiences in these issues that affect them so deeply, and to respond in ways that are particular to the Pacific Islander community? So what can we do to avoid reifying erasure and seeing not just physical space but also intellectual space as open and able to be exploited and taken for a variety of purposes?
I know Joseph has a really good response to this. Because I say that because, I learned from him in this area, because for me, I'm much newer to this Pacific Northwest region. And so my experiences are quite different. So, but I obviously have had those life experiences too. But Joseph eats, sleeps, and breathes this. So yeah. So
Michael. Yeah, I mean, you've also, Tabby, you've also kind of mentioned just how vast these regions are. Asia itself, Asia is a giant continent with many, many peoples. And then you have the biggest ocean on Earth, the Pacific Ocean. And while our numbers are not many Pacific peoples, there are so many nations in the Pacific, and to just lump everybody together, that's white supremacy, to just lump two giant regions together and call it good, right? I think there are definitely a lot of movements. In 1997, Senator Kaka Kanaka Oivio Hawaii, along with Pacific Islander leaders, fought to disaggregate the categorization of Native Hawaiian Pacific peoples as a unique racial group, so that was captured on the census. Also on a federal level, it's captured on how data is collected, but that didn't necessarily translate on a state and local level, right? Which is the term NH/PI. And it's very similar to the grouping of American Native American / Alaskan Native, right? So similar to that grouping. And we've been trying to educate folks to use NH/PI as the way to categorize us, and to stay away from using API, because API, it's really racist, right? It just contributes to the systemic erasure of Pacific peoples, and we've never consented to the PI being attached to the A, so why do we continue to perpetuate it? Like, we know it's a problem, why are we continuing to use it? And so it's also a lot of education, like with our Asian communities, to really resist throwing the PI in there. Like, just do Asia, just do Asian American,
there's enough. Yeah.
Yeah, just let us do us and you guys can do you. And also API erases NH. Like at least with Pacific people, we like NH, Native Hawaiians are an Indigenous American people. You know, it's a whole state, you know, like how you erase the whole Indigenous people of a whole state. And which is why at least here in Washington, we organize as NH/PI. There was a new term that was just created at the federal level, and it's Indigenous American, right, or Indigenous. And so that term brings in not just American, Alaskan Natives, Native Americans, but also brings in Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders into the term Indigenous. And so that body of work is housed under the Office of Minority Health, because there are very similar disparities across, you know, NH/PIs and, you know, NA/AN, you know, or Alaskan Native, American Indian, Alaskan Native. Yeah, and so I think it's just a lot of education that we have to do. Yeah, if there's API groups around, I'm like, try to retire and rebrand. Because NHPI people need to have their own space, right? And then have them be represented every time. I mean, you think about the last 40 years, NHPI have not been at equity tables because we've had Asian people speak for us. In the last 40 years of combating racism, we were not asked to be at the table. We were not allowed at the table, NHPIs. And that is a lot of decades to miss in terms of building our strategy and building with other communities of color. Like, we want to build with everybody else. Let us be at the table and have a seat at the table. And so it's a lot of work, Tabby. It's so much work to do it. But we have our National Association of Pasifika Organizations, NAOPO, that we just formed at the national level to liaise with the federal government, and also to support our state-based organizations to really, you know, have the support so that we're able to continue to lift this work up and take it forward, you know. And so it's a lot of work, but I think because of COVID, we saw how COVID tried to erase us during COVID, even though we were dying at the worst rates, we had the worst hospitalization. They would mention in their equity plans, and this is Biden, this is the National Academies of Sciences, they would mention Black, Latino, Native American, and they did not put in NHPIs because we were lumped in with the Asian stats, right? And so we were erased out of that, even though we were the ones that were dying from at the worst rates from this disease. And we said, no, you're going to put us in there, put NHPI in there. And how dare you erase us? And this is the data that we've collected from the 26 states that disaggregate COVID data and NHPI that says we're actually the worst impacted communities because of COVID. And so this organizing work, Tabby, has to be done across our communities. We have very unique issues. Native Hawaiians have theirs. Kofa Islanders have theirs, you know, like the territories have theirs. And I think Polynesians, Micronesians, Melanesians, Native Hawaiians have to really be intentional about how we organize together. And there's no way forward if we're not doing it together. And we also have to acknowledge the differences that our communities have, but never lose sight that together we have a stronger like voice, you know, that we can drive stuff together.
Joseph, that was magnificent. I just thoroughly appreciate how you describe the unity of that really complex paradox of unity and distinction, and why both are necessary in order to combat erasure. And Michael, did you want to speak to that a little bit?
You know, I thought that was an absolute beautiful response. I don't know if I really have anything to add.
Okay, no, I just wanted to be able to really just express my appreciation to you, Joseph, especially for talking about how the AAPI or API or APIDA or all of the different names and racialized categorizations, how these are dangerous and how they have the potential to erase Pacific people and the genocide of Pacific people when we are not aware of these dangers. So again, that speaks to the purpose of this conversation. And I think it beautifully just sums up why we're here, why we're having this conversation, and most importantly, the work that needs to be done across, not only across the state, but across the nation, and throughout the world. So yes, as we conclude here, I wanted to also provide you the opportunity to share any final thoughts, and to share any maybe ideas for us as to other issues or other concerns that might be worth further exploring on this topic or in this series.
You know, I'll just sort of begin my concluding remarks talking a little bit more on the research academic side of things, because I think that you know, I think it's a misnomer to say that, you know, we cannot get data on our community because our communities are too small. I think that is a greater reflection on the priorities of academia. I think it's a priority. I think it has to do with priorities in terms of funding, because there are many ways to generate knowledge, right? Which is the goal of research, you know. And I think, you know, some of the ways in which, you know, even this recording is a form of data that can be analyzed, you know, and I think that we need to really start to shift away from this idea of why we can't do research with our communities, and really focus on what should research look like within communities. You know, how do we generate knowledge? Because our communities have thinkers. Our communities have people who spend their lives generating knowledge, you know, not just recalling, remembering, bringing forth, sustaining knowledge, but generating new knowledge. We're not static people. We don't you know, we don't live, you know, within the context of our ancestors. You know, we understand that we live in the context of a Western modern world, and that for us, you know, we also need to adapt, and we need to change, and we need to grow. And we have thinkers within our community that are generating knowledge for our communities. And so I think for us to think about Western science as the only answer towards knowledge generation, that's also a white supremacist racist notion, that we don't have knowledge generators and thinkers within our own community. And I think, you know, today is just today is just a good example of that. And I think that, you know, as we move forward, as I move forward in my own academic career, you know, that's something that I want to place at the forefront, is that Western science and Western research is useful to a degree, but it isn't the be all end all in terms of how knowledge is generated. And in fact, if we use only Western methods, then we run the risk of potentially doing great harm, right? I mean, I gave you the example of the windmills, you know, for example. You know, this is, you know, the intentions are not bad, right? I mean, there's a underlying intent that's good there, but you know, because of the invisibility, because of you know, the lack of voice within our communities, because of the lack of advocacy, people can do things like this to us. And you know, if it's not for voices in the community like Joseph, myself to a much lesser extent, but as also Joseph's colleagues, you know, I mean, then we, you know, we have a greater uphill battle. So I'm so appreciative for the work that's being done, and you know, all I ever offer is you know, whatever I can give, you know, to the Pacifica community. Whatever I can give, I'm willing to give, because so near and dear to me. And for me, I think that we actually hold a lot of truths that can be useful to the greater society. And I hope that people will listen to us, because I think we have so many good things to share about this wonderful earth and how we can live in harmony with it and each other.
Thanks, Michael, Dr. Michael. I think any last words from me is, there's existing movements of Indigenous people that we can support, right? I think oftentimes in environmentalism, it's also very plagued by white saviorism, and we need to we are the original environmentalists, Indigenous people, Pacific people, Native Americans. We are it. We are the water protectors, the mountain protectors. Like, invest your resources in spending time with Native-led causes, Pacific-led causes. I know of not just the Native people here in Washington State, but I also know that we have Pacific Climate Warriors that is based out of Portland. A lot of students, Micronesian and Polynesian students, Kevin Aipopo, Simeon Jacob, Trina Sound, Makiarusa, that have done a lot of work to educate our communities there, and also, finding ways to support our Native Hawaiian brothers and sisters in protecting their mountain, Mauna Kea, and other ways. I think that people can meaningfully participate and not have to go to some very white cultured, space. We can do our resistance in our own skin, in our own communities, right? And I think people need to know that, and people need to be encouraged to do that. So, and also thank you, Tabby, for the space. Oh, you're such a bright fire of energy and passion, and yeah, you bring a lot. And thank you for just giving us some energy for this morning. It's been fun. Fafte lava.
And mahalo.
Thank you all so much. And I feel like I would be remiss not to pass it over to Tabby and see, Tabby, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
Oh, I am just so humbled and so honored to be able to learn from you both, Joseph. That is just such a high praise from you, who I regard, like Michael said, as a beacon for the work being done. And I'm just so inspired, and I just want to thank you deeply. Thank you so much. And I just admire you both, and thank you for sharing space today. And I look forward to seeing the results. I also wanted to and I was speaking with Asia about this, in post-production, we definitely want to have the land acknowledgements of the different spaces that we each occupy. And also I wanted to I was thinking, I mean, you can cut this out, Asia, but I was like, mic drop to Joseph for talking about white environmentalism, like, especially in Seattle, especially in the Pacific Northwest. I love that we can talk about the environment. I love that we can talk about Pacific climate justice without centering it in whiteness. And so thank you both for that necessary distinction. Biba.
Wonderful. And yeah, just to close out, my sincerest gratitude to Tabitha, Michael, and Joseph, all of you, for such just a candid, enriching, and really profound conversation. I leave this session with much to think about and to dive deeper into. And it's just been a true honor to hear from you all firsthand. And yeah, finally, to view more recorded discussions and events like this one, please check out our Humanities Washington YouTube page. You can also find information on all of our programs at humanities.org. Thank you so much.